Welcome to Biztech's Health and Wellness Show, where we focus on equipping you with the knowledge on health and wellness to help you to ensure a more productive and healthy life for yourself, for your families, and also for your employees. Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and I'm hosting you today on the show. Today, we focus on gut health, an area where most of us don't really think about as part of our overall well-being. However, there's a growing body of global research that's indicating that gut health is one that plays a central role in health and disease. Now, to bring expert insights, we've got Blake Willis. He's the Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. Alena Pribyl, Senior Scientist at Microba. Now, Microba is an Australian company that's a world leader in the analysis of gut microbiomes. Now, Blake and Alena, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be here.
Now, let's start by giving our audience a 101 really on microbiomes and the importance of gut health.
Excellent. It's my favorite topic. So just to kind of set the stage for our audience members that might not be aware, actually more than half of the cells in your body are actually microbial or actually bacteria in origin. And so when you consider what makes up your body, most of it's actually bacteria. And that has come as a surprise because, 10, 15 years ago, if somebody was talking about gut health, probably the last thing you were thinking about is your bacteria that live in your body.
Yeah.
And what we've discovered is that actually most of that bacteria that lives in our body is actually living in our gut, and actually more specifically in the lower gut, in the colon. And this is what's really amazing, is because we're finding that these bacteria that live in our gut, which we now like to call the gut microbiome, is actually influencing our body systemically. So all of these different systems we have in our body, our immune system, our metabolic system, our cardiovascular system, we're finding out that these bacteria are actually helping influence and modulate how those systems operate. And the way they're actually doing this is through thousands of different compounds that they're able to produce. So bacteria have hundreds of thousands more genes in their genome, in their DNA, than we have in the human body. And that allows them to produce thousands of different types of compounds, way more than our human body can produce. And those compounds are interacting with our immune system and changing how our immune system is going to operate. And we're finding that now all of these different gut bugs are actually linked to multiple different diseases. So pretty much any disease that you can name has been linked to those bacteria living in your gut. And the reason for that is because of all those different compounds that those bacteria are producing. They're going into our body and they're influencing all those different systems. And so this is becoming a very exciting area, especially for health and wellness, because it's something that we all have the capacity to change. The bacteria that live in our gut, they're not set. It's not like the DNA in our human body. They're very malleable. And so by adjusting certain lifestyle factors, especially diet, you might actually be able to change who's in your gut, and that in turn can help improve your health and well-being.
Now, Alena, I'm going to come back to you later in terms of how we're going to improve our gut health and also stuff like what we should be avoiding and what we should be doing to improve it. But, Blake, over to you. Could you give us an overview of Microba and the services and technology that you offer?
Thank you, Brian. So Microba was founded in 2017 out of the University of Queensland. Two professors who are very talented microbiologists, Professor Phil Hugenholtz and Professor Jean Tyson, they founded the technology when they moved back to Australia in 2010. They developed it over a 7-year period before we spun out of the University of Queensland. And some few years later, we're now offering this testing service globally. So here in Australia, we launched in July of 2018, but since then we've launched services into the US and also into Europe. We're also in many negotiations at the moment about Middle East and various parts of Asia. So ultimately, it's a testing service that can tell you very deeply about the bacteria that live in your gut. And as Alena just explained, this community of bacteria called the gut microbiome are critical in your overall health and well-being. So whether you're a consumer, a clinician, or a researcher, we can tell you very precisely who's living in your gut and what they're capable of doing.
Now, you talked about partnerships. What sort of partners and customers are you seeking in Asia?
In Asia and globally, in fact, we're seeking partners that have active audiences that are used to testing. So whether they be consumers or clinicians, we're interested in finding those partners that have established networks, that have clinicians that already use gastrointestinal testing actively in their day-to-day practice. So these could be large pathology groups, they could be large personalized consumer health companies, and they could also be large clinics that distribute testing. So at Microba, we've recognized that we don't need to be in all markets ourselves. We can identify really good partners, and we essentially become the microbiome analysis engine, or in other words, the Intel chip that sits behind our partners testing globally.
Okay, now you've got a new partnership with Illumina. Could you enlighten us on the partnership and what are the anticipated impacts moving forward?
Sure. Firstly, Illumina, for those who don't know, are a San Diego headquartered company. They're listed on NASDAQ. They have a market capitalization of about $58 billion. But more importantly, they're broadly perceived as the leader in DNA sequencing globally. And DNA sequencing has become an enormous market that we apply in all sorts of health and research settings. So at Microba, we recognized very early on that they had the best DNA sequencing technology. And if we were to marry that with the best microbiome analysis technology, you'd get a very good end result. So after a couple of years of working together, we decided that we would formalize our relationship with Illumina and offer the best microbiome testing service available in the Asia Pacific region. And we think this is going to unlock a lot of opportunity to ask more questions of the microbiome for pharmaceutical companies, for biotech companies, for consumer health companies, but also for researchers working in an academic setting. It's really a perfect match between the best sequencing and the best microbiome analysis.
So in other words, is your go-to-market strategy then particularly in Asia, to go together?
Exactly right. Singapore is the headquarters in the Asian region for Illumina. So they've got a fantastic presence in Singapore, but also in many other countries throughout the Asian region. So we're very happy to have a partner that's strong in Asia, such as Illumina. We also work with other companies in the Asian region. For example, in Korea, we work with a company called Microbia, who are a leading DNA sequencing company as well. So we identify partners and we go to market together through those partnerships.
Now, how do your products actually use to improve healthcare outcomes overall?
Sure. Do you want to take that one, Alena?
Sure. So our main product that we offer here in Australia is called the Insight test. So this is, as Blake referred to, it's one of the most precise microbiome tests that is currently available. And so with this, we're able to give customers a very deep understanding of who's living in their gut and what those bacteria are capable of doing. So as I mentioned before, the key thing that how these bacteria are actually influencing our health is through the compounds they produce. And so we know through the published literature that there's many compounds that have been directly linked to multiple different disease states. And so we've actually gone through the literature and pulled out those key compounds and are now able to report on the ability of the bacteria that we see in your gut to be able to produce those compounds that have been linked to health or disease. And for most of those compounds, there's actually dietary interventions you can use to help reduce their impact. So one key example is there's a very pro-inflammatory compound that we call lipopolysaccharides. And they're known to cause chronic low-level inflammation. And it's been linked to multiple disease states. But we know if you have a diet that's high in saturated fat, you're going to allow that compound to actually escape from the intestines into the rest of your body. So it's allowed to circulate throughout the rest of your body. But if you can reduce the amount of saturated fat in your diet, that compound's no longer going to be able to cross over into the rest of your body. And so you can help reduce the impact of it. And so for many of these, we've got suggestions such as this to help people basically try to shift their gut microbiome to a healthier state through better food choices, but also to reduce the impact of potentially detrimental compounds that they might have being produced.
Now, Alena, I want to kind of get you to illuminate our audiences in terms of research and help us understand biome research a little better. Can you tell us about metagenomics and also the role in analyzing microbiomes?
That's an excellent, excellent question, Brian. And that's one of the reasons that at Microba, we're able to offer some of the most precise microbiome analyses available, because we're using this technology called metagenomic sequencing. And what that actually means is it means that it's a technology where we can directly sequence all of the DNA within a sample. And this allows us to look at all of the DNA within all those different bacteria that are living in your gut. And so all that DNA is what's illuminating for us those different functions that we know are linked to health and disease. So now we can, by looking at all the DNA from a bacteria, we can say, oh, they've got the genes that are going to allow it to produce lipopolysaccharides. So we know that that person, if they're feeding that bacteria correctly, are going to be producing lipopolysaccharides or have the potential to produce it. And that's what is so amazing about metagenomics, is it gives you this whole extra breadth of detailed information that you can actually start to make basically good choices now because of that extra knowledge. And this is what's also helping out the medical industry now, because this is where we're actually going to start to be able to highlight diagnostic biomarkers for disease, where we're going to be able to look more in depth at potential therapeutics to help assist chronic diseases that still have a big gap in treatments.
Now, could you give us some examples of studies and projects that are currently using this next generation sequencing?
Oh yes, it's becoming quite popular now. And so most studies that you see right now in chronic diseases that are interested in the gut microbiome will be using this technology, metagenomics, because people now realize that to get to the level of resolution, to be able to actually understand how the gut microbiome is playing a role in disease, you need to be using this type of technology. I should add that we do have a differentiator, that our analysis platform sets us apart from other groups using the same technology, because we can detect more of the bacteria in a sample than anyone else can right now.
And you anticipated my question, actually, because I was just going to say, what makes you different from someone else?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to give you the context before I jump into the disease application, because that's the key, is that a lot of the other groups out there right now are using standard tools that basically identify around 60 to 65% of the species in a sample. And using our analysis tools, which we've developed through the direction of our co-founders, who are pioneers and basically really started this field, they've been able to help us develop a technology and a tool where we're actually seeing between 80 to 90% of the species in a sample. So we're filling in a big part of that picture that a lot of other groups are missing. And what we found in our own research now, looking at inflammatory bowel disease, for example, is that by looking at 80 to 90% of the microbiome instead of 60 to 65% of the microbiome, we're identifying key bacterial species and strains that are playing a very key role in inflammatory bowel disease that other groups have missed. And we're now able to target these for development into therapeutics and potentially as companion diagnostics to determine what type of medicine might be best suited for a patient.
Now, Blake, I've got to ask you, this sounds really good. I'm a person that only very recently has been reading up about gut health because I've become aware of how important it is. But how much does this cost really in the sequence as compared to other traditional tests?
Certainly, Brian. Well, firstly, you're not alone in terms of people reading up on gut health. 1 in 5 people actually suffer from gastrointestinal issues, and it's something that typically always affects someone that is known to you or your family or yourself. So it's a very important unsolved issue. At the moment, we've been able to achieve a price of 350 Australian dollars, which is incredible. Our co-founder likes to tell a story. Back in 2004, when he first developed this technology, a single sample would have cost $250,000 to sequence. So we're very proud of the price point we've got it to, but we also think that there's a future where that could be much lower as well.
Okay, and so price is a very important issue, because the key issue is if gut health affects 1 in 5, as you've mentioned, public health, then this has got to be applied into the mass market, which is the public health sector. What are you doing in this space?
Absolutely. Well, the partnership we announced with Illumina is a great example, and I just want to paint a future picture for you. We do believe at Microba that one day you'll go and see your doctor, your physician, and every year you'll actually get a gut microbiome test, like you might get a blood pressure test or other readouts around your overall health and well-being. We believe it's that important and has been linked to that many disease states that every year you should actually be checking your microbiome to see if there's something wrong, something abnormal about your gut. So in terms of public health, we think there's got to be a move towards the understanding the importance of gut health. But more specifically, there's direct applications in hospital settings. For example, some of us will, from time to time, suffer from acute gastrointestinal issues. And that may be caused by a bacteria or what we call a pathogen living in your gut. So with our technology in a hospital setting, you can very quickly have a look at the entire gut microbiome, whereas the previous technology would only let you look at one or two organisms at a time. So you may not actually get down to the root cause of what's causing your gastrointestinal issues. So we're actively in discussions with a number of hospitals. We're working with some of the leading clinicians globally. We are very excited about some of the studies that we have underway to demonstrate to clinicians and governments just how important it is to use this comprehensive approach to understanding the gut instead of a very narrow view.
And Blake, one of the key things then, and I come back to cost again, is driving down the cost curve, because if it is as important as we now realize that it is, it's got to come down to a level where everyone should have access to it. So is that a case where we will have exponential reductions in cost as we roll this out over greater numbers of people?
Certainly, Brian. We saw it 15 years ago, $250,000 for a price of this test. Today, we're at $350. We actually see a future in 3 to 5 years where that could be under $100. The core input costs are getting much more efficient and therefore a lower price point. So we are actively moving in that direction. We're excited to make this technology as accessible as it possibly can be.
And where do you see Microba expanding the use and applications of this analysis?
Well, the opportunity here, as Alena alluded to, is enormous. We can help in so many different health areas. We can diagnose disease conditions such as inflammatory bowel disease from the gut. We can predict response to treatment, so we can determine if you'll respond to a particular treatment. That might be an inflammatory bowel disease, but it might also be in cancer. One of the newest areas that we're looking at is in cancer and predicting response to a drug class called immune checkpoint inhibitors. These are the latest drugs that are on market for melanoma and lung cancer patients, and they are fantastic drugs when they work, but they're expensive, and they only work in 20 to 40% of patients, and they can have negative side effects. So if we can tell you exactly who's going to respond to the drug due to the interaction of the gut and the immune system, it creates a very powerful value proposition for the patient, for the healthcare system paying for the drugs. But what's even more exciting is if we can shift the microbiome in the right direction, we may be able to actually improve the response of these drugs. So the applications of gut testing, because it is so central to our overall health and well-being, is quite broad. So we're excited. At the moment, we're doing consumer testing, we're doing clinician testing, we're helping pharma companies, biotech companies, and researchers. But I think there's going to be some very pointed use cases that we'll be coming to market with over the next couple of years.
Now, Alena, I've got to come back to you, and I need your help to explain to the audience, really starting out with the 101, how do we take better care of our gut health?
You're probably not going to like it, but the answer is quite simple. And it's really plainly, eat as many different sources of fiber as you can. So it really comes down to the fact that all those bacteria that are doing really good things in your body, they love to eat rich foods that are rich in fiber. And the key is that you want to be diversifying the different types of fiber in your diet. So I think, especially in Western society, people often fall into the trap where the main source of fiber they're getting is whole wheat. And that's a wonderful source of fiber. However, if that's the only fiber you're getting, you're going to be really restricting the number of good bacteria that you're going to have in your gut. And so thinking about how can you add different types of fruits and vegetables and multiple different types of grains into your diet. Try adding rye, eating quinoa, brown rice, barley, sorghum, whatever is available in your area, just trying to diversify the number of plant-based foods you eat. And a real nice rule of thumb to try to aim for is see if you can eat 20 different types of plants each day in your diet.
20 different, wow, okay.
And it sounds like a lot, but if you consider, if you have like a breakfast cereal and muesli, that might have some nuts, so that's already one. Then you might have some oats, which is 2. You add like a berry mix on top that might have 3 different types of berries. So there you're already at 5 different plants. So you can do the same thing at lunch, have a different salads every day that have multiple types of vegetables and grains in there. Maybe at dinner, soups with a lot of vegetables. It's easier to do than it sounds, and it'll really help improve your gut microbiome.
And I'm going to follow your advice, Alena, and I'm not just saying this because we are on air. But on the other end of the spectrum, what sort of food should we avoid, which are basically detrimental to our gut health?
It's probably what you already know and are familiar with. So most of the research right now has really shown that processed foods are not doing anything good for you.
Yeah.
In particular, there have been several studies out about artificial sweeteners and emulsifiers that are present in a lot of our processed foods. We also are seeing that the quality of the fat that you're having, so saturated fat in particular, is going to be promoting the growth of more pro-inflammatory bacteria, whereas the good fats, the ones that are present like in avocado and olive oils, those are going to help promote more of the beneficial bacteria. So it's what we already know. It's really, cutting down on those fried fatty foods, cutting down on the processed foods, the chips, the cookies, the things that we like to grab off the supermarket shelf, and really trying to go back to the whole foods, trying to make sure that, when you're eating a meal that you know exactly what's in it. There's not some chemicals that you can't even pronounce the name of.
Now, thank you very much for that advice. Blake, any final words? Alena, any final words before we end the conversation?
Brian, the very popular question is always around probiotics and whether or not they work.
Yeah.
And I just think it's worth hearing from Alena, not only if they work or not, but also as to how our technology may be useful in the future.
Sure. So we do need to say that currently there's really no scientific evidence that probiotics are effective in adults, in healthy adults. We have seen that for antibiotic-associated diarrhea, they might be effective, but in the most case, there's no strong scientific evidence that they're doing any benefit. They're mostly just transitioning right through our bodies. But the key is that all the probiotic bacterial species that are currently available are from ones that we cultured a long time ago from fermented foods, your bifidobacterium and your lactobacillus. But what we now know is there's a lot of really beneficial bugs in our gut that are producing really great compounds that can really help our health that aren't available yet as probiotics. And so that's what Blake is alluding to, is that's where we need to get, is to that next generation of probiotics that is actually taking those healthy bacteria from our gut and making that available. So people that are perhaps are missing some of these key bacteria will now be able to ingest that and hopefully help them colonize their gut.
Now, Alena, Blake, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's been great to be here.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Blake Willis, Chief Executive Officer, Microbia, and Dr. Alena Pribyl, Senior Scientist at Microbia, on Biztech's Health and Wellness Show. This video will be on our Facebook and our LinkedIn sites, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.